heard that you control the internet.
Some people might say that.
That's amazing.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
Does it keep you up at night?
It does, mostly because I don't have as much control as I would like. It's like Google was programmed to operate on its own and learn through AI. And what it has become is not the exact thing that I would do, but it's not so bad either. It's pretty ingenious. So, yeah.
So you feel like Google's kind of built itself?
No, I think people have programmed Google, but then the Google search results are typically not manually altered, particularly for commercial things. I don't know if they would be altered for things that felt dangerous or things that have to do with public safety or something like that. But people have put a ton of time and effort into the machine learning that makes Google choose certain pages for search results. And although they didn't do a very good job, well, they did a much better job than most people or myself would have done, but they really did not do a good job of protecting against the spam that people would naturally try to throw at them for until about 2010. But since then, it's progressively gotten better and more relevant. So I have to say I'm a fan nowadays.
But you weren't at the beginning?
I wasn't, no. I used to view it like an aristocracy. I would switch between the metaphor of oligarchy and aristocracy, where the few had the power and the rich got richer, because large companies would always pop up at the top of search results. It was either large companies or spammers. It was whoever projected or showed Google's robots that they had the most links from other websites, those hypertext links from other websites. Whoever had the most within a given search category or around a certain keyword showed up at the top. That was the way the founders of Google ingeniously organized the web in 1998 at Stanford when they first conceived of the idea of the Google search engine. But it was quickly taken advantage of by professional spammers and small-time spammers, and then large companies just benefited because they get publicity, which leads to links every day.
But there's still kind of a situation where the big companies are getting to the top of Google search, right?
Yes, there is, and that's because big companies still have a lot of links, and links are still a reasonably big part of Google's algorithm, but that has been changing. So whereas I was far more skeptical of Google years ago, in the last few years, I found that if we're going to stay with the metaphor of, ocracy or whatever, whatever the word is, this is more like an infotocracy than an aristocracy, like it used to be, where if you follow some organizational principles that Google makes pretty clear with placing the words that you want to rank for in what's known as the title tag of your page, and you have the most interesting information or the most helpful information that keeps people on the site the longest, generally you have a pretty good shot of ranking. So I think that's been a positive change.
So you think this has to do with the fact that Google and the searchers have the same interests?
Yes, I do. I think Google is motivated by money. It's a public company with a duty to its shareholders. And Google makes the most money, and I'm talking about Google, specifically the search engine part of the alphabet, larger umbrella business, when people find exactly what they're looking for and kind of say to themselves subconsciously, wow, that was like a utility, like water or electricity. I don't even have to think. I know if I go to Google, I'm going to get a satisfying, relevant answer. It's a very powerful thing. It is as powerful as saying, I know when I go to my sink tap, I'm going to get water. It's pretty amazing. You're just going to reflexively go to your sink when you need that. So I think that the interests are indeed aligned there.
It's fascinating that you compare it to water. We're having some problems with our water pump system. I don't know if you can hear it in the background. But
No.
It's fascinating that you compare Google to a public utility like that, because I feel like when humans first started thinking about the internet, it was something that was going to break the pattern of everything that had happened before. And right now, it seems like search has become something that is almost mundane.
Hmm.
It's not a path to searching for something exquisite or exotic. It's a path to finding the most centrally agreed upon piece of information.
Hmm. I'm thinking about your statement because my first instinct is to say that I agree, but Google in the last few years has been rewarding niche expertise and in a way is a bit more democratic.
Hmm.
But I can't say that I fully disagree with what you just said because the people that can the companies that can hire SEO companies like mine or have really great internal SEO folks are just kind of doing the right thing, and they're doing content not because they're really inspired, but because that they know that it's going to get them to rank higher and they make more sales. And so we are essentially seeing lots of the same companies for years at a time at the top of the search results. I guess I'm just thinking about the fact that people search more specifically with more words in their string of their keyword string. Every 5 years or so, a study comes out showing that, often from Google itself. And it shows people are getting more specific, and Google needs pages to serve up people that type in highly specific, like 8-word searches. And there is an opportunity to rank for small niche businesses, or in the case of just knowledge-based things, there's an opportunity to rank. It is not undemocratic and closed off, but it is way easier if you're a business with a lot of money for certain. Um, I would say YouTube, another Google-owned or Alphabet-owned business, is way bigger problem in terms of the point I think you're making.
Can you elaborate?
Yes. YouTube, for anyone that uses it a lot,
Never heard of it.
video sharing site, largest in the United States within the Earth. I don't know have you guys been to Earth?
Not yet.
We're on our way.
Oh, it's a pretty interesting place. There's some great things about it.
We've heard good things.
So YouTube keeps you browsing basically the same types of videos and doesn't really suggest things that are outside of your directly stated interests that well. And when it does, it's usually the same videos over and over that it, I guess, has tested and feels are popular. So there's not a great opportunity with all the content on YouTube, and there's some amazing content on YouTube. It's very difficult to find it. I mean, it feels like that that rule that basically says in systems of production, it's like a small percentage of people that end up getting the greatest share of attention, or I guess it counts for products as well.
Like the Pareto distribution.
Yes, thank you. The Pareto distribution, where just a tiny percentage of content creators get far and away the lion's share of the views. And while I don't think there's anything, I mean, that is a natural thing, I do think that it's too lumped into, like, I don't know, 50 or 100 creators that gets so much. It's similar to wealth inequality in a way.
And it seems like the consumers of the media would benefit from some injection of change to this algorithm.
On the YouTube side, yes, it really does. I suppose sometimes I think the people at YouTube, are they just saying, well, people are spending a ton of time on YouTube, I guess it's fine.
Right.
If so, I think they're being short-sighted. They are being correct in making as much money as possible, I would say, but they're being short-sighted in that there's a long game there with ultimately trusting the source of media. And, we as people think about things like that. Like, if YouTube sort of gets closer to what I think TikTok does, which is almost shameless, where they just show you the most interesting moment of like a longer, filmed event or whatever. Just the moment that like someone plays a prank on them and the person screams and it's just like 5 seconds or 10 seconds long. It literally is addictive. It's like there hasn't been enough, I think, conclusive scientific studies to cause there to be regulation of it as actually addictive for kids and adults too. But if YouTube goes that direction, as they sort of are, with just trying to keep your attention, and it ultimately makes people dissociate more and probably contributes to people not getting outside or at least thinking more to help themselves get further in the world. I do think ultimately it's not going to work out well for them. Maybe they'll have cashed in their shares by then or something like that. But I actually believe in podcasts a lot more as a discovery medium.
So we love podcasts too, but we noticed a kind of similar effect over at Spotify. Where
we have Spotify Space, it's a special deal.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah. There's a Spotify in every solar system, something like it. But it's the same problem where a few of the podcasts drift to the top and it's really hard to find new material. Same with music. I'm a huge Earth music fan and I have a really hard time discovering new music through these big aggregators that ultimately have access to enormous libraries. But it's very difficult to find new material. They just keep feeding you the same material every day.
That's interesting. I totally agree when Spotify is your search engine of choice for podcasts. I think, I've thought about this a lot, but I feel like for actually discovering something new, you need some sort of community forum. To some degree, Reddit could be a place where, someone's like, hey, have you heard of this? But even then, how do you find the right subreddit? And not all interests are, I think, properly represented. Reddit is skewed to certain demographics. I actually find some of my best recommendations are just groups of, in-person groups that I'm a part of where people say, yeah, I've been doing this thing lately, or I've heard of this thing lately. And sometimes there's large boards for like the national, when these groups have chapters in states and then they have like a national board that brings all the chapters together and you can post and say, what do people recommend for? Sometimes you do well there, but I do think there is a content finding problem with all of this AI and all this computing power we have. I do agree that it's nice to give people the best of the best, the cream of the cream, and it's certainly going to keep them hooked for a while because it's there for a reason typically. But discovery of new interesting things is a problem that is not being solved very well by the internet, I would say. I'd say the last time I felt that way was Pandora, like 10 years ago.
Well, it's fascinating that you say that it's not being solved on the internet, because I kind of feel the same way. If you go to Google and you search for something like podcasts or even YouTube channels, the same big channels always come up. There's a cross-linking that happens where it's only the big channels that are getting recognition, only the podcasts that come from big studios or have some kind of institutional supports that are getting recognition. And there's not really the availability of ideas that fall outside of some very narrow scope of what is in vogue right now.
But it sounds like what he's saying is that it's on the end user to take responsibility for obtaining their content. Something like that, maybe.
Well, I am saying that, but I'm sorry. Can you remind me of? I know one of you is Mickey, but your names?
I'm Mickey.
I'm Quinn.
You're Mickey. Finn?
Quinn.
Quinn. Excuse me. I knew it was Quinn. Okay. So I appreciate what Mickey said, but I still think what Quinn is saying is a problem because if you search Google for the best podcasts right now, you're going to get a bunch of SEO'd lists. And the way that people generate these lists is when you already have a popular like media website of some sort and you decide you're going to do a top 10 type of post, which you want to rank for somebody looking for exactly that. Best podcast 2021 might be the Google search keyword or whatever. Then you usually do research and you see what other people are saying. And then you say, oh, I've seen that. It's like the equivalent of recommending The Queen's Gambit on Netflix or something. It's like, yeah, everybody knows that's a great show. It's popular for a reason. It is a great show. But it's not very original to recommend that. Mm-hmm. And so you are probably going to get 10 results that are not adding that much to the conversation. And somebody slaved away and created like a top 50 podcast you probably haven't heard of or something like that. But it's probably buried because it's on a smaller blog that isn't just doing the right SEO things and sort of referencing material that's already there. But I have hope about that. The reason I have hope about that is because at my company, we do something, we try to take advantage of the exact same thing. But oftentimes the clients who come to us, they're not the largest in their sphere. So if they post a unoriginal list, they'll probably show up, let's say they're a mid-sized company on page 3, number 25 or something like that. That's not going to be very helpful. No one will see it. So we have to think a little harder. So we say, let's actually find useful podcasts that people haven't heard of. Let's scour not just lists, but ask recommendations and bring something truly original. And lo and behold, I find that we outrank the big companies just by being more original, because people, just like the three of us here, are sick of seeing the same, self-referential large list of the exact same results. So being original is being rewarded in that people appreciate it and they spend a longer time, and Google recognizes that as a ranking signal. So for that reason, I get the sense that while we're not there yet, more people will start catching on to what my company has caught on to, and we'll start writing stuff that's original for profit. I mean, not for maybe the more noble reason, but at least for the economic benefits that come from having just better content.
That's encouraging.
But at this point, how do people find that content? I mean,
do you think other search engines could pop up to compete with Google and take over that niche?
I don't. And it kind of makes me sad to say that, because I am just such a strong believer in competition and the ability for young upstart companies who really believe that things should be a little bit different and bring fresh ideas to be able to do that. But Google owns, I don't even know how many data centers. The fact that you can search for anything that you can think of and Google will scour trillions and trillions of web pages in milliseconds is because of the level of computing power they have. They've invested in, I don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands of buildings filled with servers in order to be as fast as they are. And a search engine could pop up, but it would be very slow, and it would not have the computing power to process as many pages. And I fear people would not use it. I mean, theoretically, Bing is a competitor, but it's not really a competitor. The only search share it has is from people that don't know how to change their default search engine when they buy a Microsoft computer. I would say. So
it's just too well established. It's like you're not going to see a competitor to the American Medical Association or something.
Right. It's too well established, and to my knowledge, there is no such thing as monopoly or antitrust laws right now. I know that's not technically true, but I've not heard of an antitrust case since like Netscape in 1998 or whatever. Maybe I'm just not that aware, but I feel like Google makes it impossible to compete.
I think that there is some rumblings of an antitrust case against Google right now, against Alphabet right now, because they have basically a lion's share of everything on the internet, from search to email to.
But I think at worst case scenario, they would have search broken into its own company, and it would still completely dominate the market of search.
Well, that's mostly the most profitable wing of Google, right? Where even if you break Alphabet up into its component parts, Google search is still going to be a behemoth. You can't really compete with Google search.
Right. It is possible that in some point in the future, I mean, I don't know exactly how government works, but it's possible that Google would have to share some of its computing power so that a search engine could compete under some sort of antitrust settlement. And perhaps there is an analog in the whatever competition is allowed for phone and internet cable, like cable type companies, because they just own the fiber in the ground, like these major companies like AT&T and Verizon and stuff like that. And I think sometimes they have to allow competitors in. Usually they don't. They pretty much have a monopoly too in certain areas, but there's at least something possible. I have heard of companies besides the major five or whatever, smaller companies, that they must just be renting. I'm pretty sure they're renting fiber or cable or whatever from others and or from the big companies. And I doubt the big companies would just allow that unless they were forced to. Just a guess, but there's got to be some way for a search engine to compete with Google eventually, because that would be a good thing. I actually think people would welcome that because although Google does its job very well, there's going to be there's going to be like aliens like you guys that want to see what's happening in niche interest areas, and and that would just be good for everybody. I think so. I think people would be open to it.
Well, yeah, that's interesting that you say about these niche interest areas, because I feel like Google is not a niche service provider. It provides exactly what you want when you want it. You can type in a string, you can get your answer, you walk away, you're perfectly happy.
Uh-huh.
But there are these pieces missing from the discourse. There's no way to find niche content, there's no way to find niche communities. And on one hand, that's good because you don't want to flood places with users or listeners or customers that aren't necessarily out and looking for them. But you do need to have some way of being able to find those things as a human or an alien searching on Google, or searching on the internet. And right now you say, you have these communities where you have people that get together and they can give recommendations, but what if you don't have that community? What if you're just by yourself?
What if there's a pandemic and you can't hang out with your friends?
Right, imagine that would be crazy. Well, I think it's interesting what you're saying because the niche content that many people are after is findable on Google. There's probably a website and therefore it's probably findable on Google. But all of the burden is on people to think of that unique search. And people's brains don't typically work that way. Some people proactively think, what would be interesting content that I want to see or I want to learn about? And it might be something that you see in the world that you're reminded of. You decide that you're going to learn about spelunking or, see what the world hopscotch champion looks like or something like that. That is possible, but the passive recommendation-based model of here's something you'd be interested in, I think is not being taken advantage of properly. And there's a few companies that have the data to do that have interest data. Facebook probably has the most interest data. And Google has intent data, like what do you look for, which is sort of like interest. So those are two very powerful companies that have the data, but I fear that they're using that data more to give you more of what you're definitely going to like rather than to push your boundaries. Because if you don't like something, they probably just make less money in the model of recommending things you don't like. But I do think it's in their interest to serve you tailored advertisements. Maybe somehow that becomes, maybe that becomes good if there's inexpensive advertising that niche websites and content producers can do to find exactly the types of folks like that. But I don't see that data being used that way right now.
Well, it'd be interesting to see a third button added to the mix, because you usually like something or you don't like it. And if you like it, you're going to just keep seeing more of that video. And
Right.
especially on the music servers, it's like, well, I like this song, but I've heard it 20 times this week. So it'd be interesting to have a button like, I like this, but I've had enough of it. And I'd like a diversity button, right? more like this, but not this. And that seems to be a missing feature right now on Earth.
Yeah, I agree. And I mentioned it before, Pandora. I don't know if you have it on your planet or if you used it a while ago, back when it was really popular.
We
Did
did,
you?
yeah, definitely, yeah. But even worse, same problem, even worse. Just like the same 20, 100 songs, whatever, on loop.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't have that experience. Maybe I'm going to have to guess that
This was a
on your
long time
planet,
ago, sorry.
a long time ago. Okay, it's possible that people that are more into music wouldn't have been as fascinated. I usually like listen to pop music and stuff, so I already have like the same songs that are on the radio that were on the radio back when I was listening to the radio in my head, and so it felt very original, the recommendations I got. And for me, Pandora is the pinnacle of passive recommendation.
Mm.
um, quote unquote search, or whatever you want to call it, content recommendation. I've not seen anything since that felt really good. And I would take random recommendation. That would be fine as well. And then I would really like to be able to train the algorithm. I think there's a hunger for that. And I often wonder why not enough businesses do that. There are, by the way, if you search for like movie or book recommendation engines, there are some out there, but they're not well funded. They're slow. And I don't find that they're that targeted. I think that's kind of a holy grail, is to legitimately serve you content that you're interested in after you've trained it for an hour or something like that. And I think it would just take a really creative and mathematically sound kind of algorithm, taking into account what you've approved and what people like you who have approved that ended up liking, that sort of thing.
That requires a constant feeding of the algorithm back and forth, though, right? Where you have a service where people are rating things, and as they watch new things that are suggested, they rate them, and then
Right.
everything gets passed back and forth. It's almost like a social network based solely around the recommendation of content,
Mm-hmm.
which is missing right now. You're exactly right. Because social networks aren't based around the discovery of new things. There isn't a social network that's based on this idea of let's discover something new. Social
Mm-hmm.
networks are based on the idea that you can connect to people that share your views.
And this has led to a whole other conundrum on Earth, it seems like. This stark polarization of communities where people with fringe ideas consolidate their ideas and attract others, and you have extreme radicalization. And
Well, because people are organizing around political and social ideas rather than around the quality of art.
it becomes a lifestyle, right?
Mm.
Where your political and conspiratorial minded affinities become a sort of entertainment lifestyle. It's what you do for fun. Just troll on the internet with your buddies in whatever group you've been isolated into. This is kind of interesting. I wonder what you
Yeah,
humans will make
that
of
is
it.
a problem. I think to myself, if there was a content recommendation engine, and I think while it's not an engine, Reddit maybe is similar. Reddit absolutely has that going on, where there's hive mind and certain subreddits where everybody just believes the same thing. You're literally like censored if you try to say anything that is your opinion that's different, even if you're not trying to be a rabble rouser or whatever, or stir the pot. But I think when things get into the category of identity, then it's like people's minds are so attracted to it that it can radicalize you more easily. And I guess what I'm wondering to myself out loud without having an answer is whether, if people found content that was interesting to them, whether it would become an identity group to them. It's like we know the really strong identity groups. If you really liked some sort of niche cultural topic, social topic, would that form an identity and then cause polarization, or is there a category of content? Is there a content type?
Well,
Uh,
it's
that would be
interesting because
okay.
I think perhaps in the past on Earth, there were identities that were consolidated tribally, but they were based around forms of entertainment like music or movies
Mhm.
that were a little more innocuous. But now you
Ah,
have people finding entertainment in politics and in conspiratorial action and activism. And so this is a somewhat more, let's say, active and perhaps potentially corrosive form of tribalism that you don't get so much with something like movies or music.
Thank you. That is exactly. I appreciate that, Mickey. What I was talking about. Something makes people who are enthusiastic about jazz music all coming together more innocuous and less likely to become a negative than people that are getting together for either religious or political reasons, because somehow those things often get to survival. I don't know how they get there, but somehow, like the random people who are elected to public office get connected with whether you are going to be treated fairly. I mean, like early childhood ideas that often have a tremendous amount of control over our lives. Am I treated fairly? Am I cared about? Am I included? And then, sometimes to the level of like, will I be wiped out or made totally poor, or have my opportunities taken away? So all these extremes happen over there. Is music safe, or do we think that could be radicalized?
That's so I immediately thought about modern art on Earth, where to me it seems like there's this drive of people that get together to appreciate some kind of art, whether it's jazz or music or painting or
Jazz or music.
Jazz or music, yeah. Sorry about that.
Quinn's not a jazz fan, if you can tell.
Some. But the point is that when you get people together over some kind of discipline, there's a push to expand the frontier of that discipline, to push the envelope, to make it into something stranger, to make it into something more difficult to engage in order to make it more exclusive.
Like to build walls around it.
To build walls around it that bar entry to the common listener, right?
Well, because that brings order to the situation. It sort of orders your tribe against the chaos of everything else.
You have a hierarchical striation of people who like entry-level jazz, and then people who like experimental acid jazz. And who are the true jazz listeners? Not the entry-level Kenny G jazzers. They're the ones that are listening to the really crazy stuff,
Interesting.
And I imagine that that's a kind of radicalism. It's not a radicalism on moral levels, the way that it is for politics, right? Politics is a moral survival radicalism. Us versus them, almost warfare. But an appreciation of the right kind of jazz is a radicalization of what is beautiful, of what is meaningful. And that seems less directly harmful. There's no dystopian stories of people who grow to like extremely niche art and then the society falls apart,
Well, the jazzers aren't storming the Capitol building or anything like that.
So you're right. It does seem less harmful. It is exclusive. That seems to be maybe the worst thing it is. That's not always a bad thing, but it is definitely excluding people when you feel like you have a higher understanding of jazz or wine or art, and it separates people. It's like a form of culture that tightens your bond with certain others and separates you. And perhaps that is a natural human behavior that feels good because of the tightening the bond with certain others part. It's not isolating, but it is separating. So perhaps that is okay. It probably is okay. So maybe
it's fundamental for sure. It seems fundamental to humans.
And I think that social media is less invested, and Google is less invested in manipulating people coming together over art, specifically because it's hard to affect real-world change by manipulating that. There's a lot of profit in manipulating how people vote, in manipulating how they spend their money, in manipulating what kind of content they pay attention to. But with something like music, it's like, well, listen to whatever you want. Who cares? You want to be exclusive? Be exclusive. It's not gonna
Well,
topple civilizations, probably.
it seems like
Maybe.
exclusion is fundamental, is what I'm trying to say. That from the time that the humans came out of the water and started walking around and building tribes, they hung out in caves, let's say. Last I remember. We didn't visit for like 5, 10,000 years, so we're on our way back. But it seems like the idea of a cave or even a hut is to exclude the rest of nature so that you have a safe place to dwell. And fundamentally, almost everything humans do in the political sphere is about making a safe place for your tribe.
Mm.
So it seems like this isn't going to go away. But
No, it's
the
the manipulation that is dangerous, right?
mm,
The
building
manipulation of what
building walls
happens.
around people, or supporting these walls that lead to more chaos in the end.
Walls that they don't necessarily see, right? Like, do people know that things on the front page of Google have been manipulated into being there?
I would say effectively no.
Hmm.
They may have some awareness, because I would say even I effectively don't. And like this has been like my life's work is understanding how to play very closely to Google's algorithm to rank at the top. When I search for something on Google, I totally kind of subconsciously know what's going to happen. I'm going to get a lot of the same types of sites, but I generally trust it. I don't say to myself, I'm going to need to think independently about these results. Look at 100 or 200, and go around to different pages, and then decide which one I'm going to look at, which might theoretically be a good way of treating ideas or something. Not get too married to the first ones given to you or the ones recommended by a certain publication just because it's given. So I would say people just do reflexively trust Google, and that's the reason why what I do. Search engine optimization is so powerful, and it also does limit information. So I think the point that you made, Quinn, before is that as long as it's not manipulated, it can be okay. These natural systems we're talking about, I would say the same for Google. If Google starts to be further manipulated where it's not democratic and certain results are allowed and certain results are not allowed, that is where it can get very dangerous because someone is making that decision. And do you trust that person? Have you interviewed them to say that they have your ideologies and your best interests at heart? Of course not. So I think
So
that's what
trust is at the core of this.
yes, absolutely. We have to feel, and it has been cast into doubt to some degree recently, but I do think that Google still has pretty high trust. I think YouTube has low trust,
Hmm.
and Facebook has low trust, and Twitter has low trust. In terms of percentage of people that trust, I think a high percentage of people, if I had to guess, I'd say like 80% or something, generally feel that Google is not trying to brainwash them or influence their minds heavily. Whereas I do think most people would say that about the others, the social platforms. Google's not a social platform.
So it seems like that's the perfect storm, is the situation where you have monolithic distributors, search engines, compilers like YouTube that also have lost public trust. That's an interesting perfect storm where folks have nothing left to turn to and there's no chance of an alternative because the physical infrastructure is just too enormous.
Well, so I can imagine that, let's say, because Evan, you said that there's very little trust in any platform really except for Google, right? At this point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If trust in Google fails or falters, what then?
That could be a good thing.
Hmm.
Can you say more?
Yeah. We have become reliant on like 5 websites. I mean, most people just basically spend most of their time on like 5 websites. We're again in another Pareto distribution. And it might be good to look at that and see what alternatives are there. I think from the the corporation's perspective, the best thing they can do to keep themselves relevant, since every empire falls, every business eventually fails. The best thing they can do is continue to keep the quality of their product high, which is harder to do in a large company. But Amazon's the speed of the delivery and the selection is so good. It's hard for me to picture not using it a lot. Sometimes I'll buy like a local honey, directly from the e-commerce website from the individual who does the honey farming and stuff, and feel good about myself or whatever. But I buy most of my stuff on Amazon because they have really, really created a competitive advantage in speed and selection.
But Amazon has a weird thing, if I can interrupt you for a moment,
Please,
where there is this strangeness in purchasing something on Amazon because a lot of the reviews are fake, right?
It's a major problem they have. They are a little bit where Google was in 2007 to 10, where a lot of the search results were fake. They were literally written in some other country from other articles that were actually good, legitimate articles. They were just like the words were paraphrased and rearranged by machines. They were called spam blogs or splogs, and they were all over the place. I don't know how many people remember it because it's been over 10 years since they were eradicated. But Google had a major problem with spam that was preventing the quality, and they really cracked down on it, did a great job. Amazon has that problem too, with exactly what you're saying, the fake reviews. If you can't trust the reviews, then Amazon quickly loses its appeal.
And so I think that's kind of what you're saying about these top 5 websites or top 5 companies that everybody turns to. They have hegemony right now, but that might not be an eternal state.
I hope it's not. Sometimes things need to burn down and restart. It's like the only thing I can think of that is like an overall positive about the pandemic, for instance, which is just negative in so many ways. I mean, we know certain positives, getting to spend more time at home, all the stuff, but largely there's just so much destruction done by the things around the pandemic and the way people have responded to it and stuff like that. But sometimes the thing that makes me feel better is just thinking that this is kind of a burning down of the system and of many different systems that we're used to, and it can produce creativity and stir people from malaise or just them having gotten used to the way things are and not needing to be productive or creative. There is going to be a lot of creativity that comes out of this, and sometimes newness can be a good thing. And I think it's just that thought. I would say the same thing about if we were to find that we were being too controlled, which some people already feel, but I'd say most people probably don't, by these 5 corporations that are, social and search websites that control so much of our attention, have so much data on us, and we were to seek something new, and we were, like our government needs to allow us to be able to see things, needs to do antitrust laws if they're applicable and allow free markets to operate. And as long as that happens, I think there could be something interesting and new and more entrepreneurship, which I always think is a good thing.
I love that.
Do you worry that Google will become difficult to get results to the top of? Do you ever worry that getting something to the top of Google will become much more difficult if they change their parameters, or they're more selective, or they're more centralized?
More manual control.
I don't, because I have been doing this now since 2004, so 17 years or so, and nothing Google's ever done has disrupted what I do, because although it was easier back then to just spam Google and publish tons of pages with the keywords you want to rank for in them, and that worked pretty well, and you would purchase links since links were always so important. I found early on that the kind of harder way to do something that is exactly what Google wanted all along, but just couldn't get to until 2010 or so, is to create phenomenal content in niche areas that people search. So if you just think of everything people would search that would be valuable for you to rank for, which is probably thousands of things in any business you may be in or any pursuit that you want to have some influence over, and then you just create the best piece of content targeting each of those thousands of things. I know that's a lot. It could take years. That has always worked. In 2004, that worked. You might get beaten out by a spammer who's just, bought 10,000 links or something, but you'd probably still be on the first page. And today you would be jammed at number one doing that. And that is basically the main strategy that I advocate and my company does. It doesn't seem like that's ever going to go away. There seems to be something naturally valuable about that Google has been brilliant enough to codify into its algorithm. But the notion of thinking of everything an audience is interested in, and then subdividing that into exactly how they would think about it, and then giving them a very satisfying answer, it's a huge amount of work, and it's a very valuable thing that I think will always be valuable to Google for a very long time to come, in my opinion. And I don't know. I feel like you'd find a way to make money from that, either through an email distribution or social media or whatever, no matter what.
So you talk about in your book that this could be something like 1,500 articles that link you back that are necessary.
Wasn't it like 5,000?
Or five? How many was it?
It was a lot.
It was a lot.
I don't remember. I'm not sure which book you're referring to.
It was Outsmarting Google, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do you think that it's possible that someone will develop NLPs to generate these kind of articles that could hack this system?
They've already done that. That's been around for a long time.
Is this the splogs you were talking about?
Splogs are the lowest quality form of NLP. It's like, is that NLP or is it like a basic or a somewhat sophisticated Perl script or something like that back then that was doing that? So there is plenty of that out there. And I've had people, sophisticated people that I know, tell me that one day natural language processing is going to be able to write just as good content as humans. It's probably true one day. But I'm not worried about it being anytime soon, the next 15, 20 years, because there's so many nuances to genuinely answering a question. And I think what I've seen of NLP that purports to create content that is going to rank highly on Google is it just references other sources, and it ultimately gives you something you could find in many other places. It's not like it's really thinking hard about how to take the best of what's around, format it into a more easily digestible format. I mean, that's a valuable thing to do. That's innovating on art or whatever you want to call it. That's you can call that original even. Copying well enough and putting it into an appealing enough format. I've just never seen it. I've seen good. I have not seen excellent. And I am in a world of excellence where that wins out. Somebody wants to compare a bunch of products, put it into a neat comparison chart, give it a 1 to 5 rating, give it a list of the most important features, simple check marks with a drop shadow behind them that are appealing to the eye. I mean, there's a lot that goes into the psychology of appealing to people and satisfying their curiosity and making them say, I don't need to go to another page. I just found exactly what I was looking for. That's not there yet. And that would be very challenging to do. I don't ever doubt that it will happen. Because eventually, God knows we won't even need human bodies. Eventually our minds can be ported over someplace, but I'm not worried about it in my career span.
What you said about this format that gives people the sense of it being where the buck stops. I don't need to go anywhere else. This looks good. These pieces of information satisfy me. That seems to be what people want from Google.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's driving Google to become something more like this listing of yes, no responses, or top 10 lists, or top 5 lists. It's a mechanism for aggregating the content of the internet to answer these queries, right? Whether it's a query of the best computer to buy, or the best pair of socks, or the best machine shop, whatever, right? This is what Google is there for. It is to answer these queries. But Google can't answer what is the right thing to do. What is moral? What is ethical? What is the difference between moral and ethical? What is the meaning of life? And that seems like the questions that people need the most amount of help with. How to live a good life. Google can't give you that. But I assume that Earthlings want to be able to get that from Google.
They do. They would like to get everything from Google if they could. I mean, they'd like to get everything that meets their needs, and seeking meaning is one of the primary needs that humans have once their basic needs are satisfied. So I agree, and I think that they will find a dearth of really good content there, and that's where, in my opinion, podcasts have been the best thing out there for that. In the world of intellectual discussion, discussion of ideas and things of meaning, podcasts and YouTube videos, if you find the right ones, and often they're one and the same, are the only place that I've really seen that, apart from, of course, old-fashioned books. But to be able to share in them socially, I think is kind of what creates far additional meaning. So that's the best that I've seen so far, and I've seen really good development there, including this show. I think that's the right spirit for that sort of need.
So it seems like you're saying, yes, those things could be missing, but that's a market. If that is a missing niche, or if that's a niche that needs to be filled, then a market can move in and take hold of that. Do you think that markets can solve all of these existential questions?
Because you can't always make money off of it, right?
Can really useful, good information always be commercialized?
Well, Google would say so, because they're making money even if you ask what 100 plus 5,020 is, because they have your attention. You're on the screen, and then you could be shown an ad for a calculator app or something like that. So they have found a pretty ingenious way, which is one of the reasons they're one of the biggest companies in the world, to monetize information. Most of the time you can, but only if you're at scale where you can draw the advertisers who will actually pay for things they can't see that may not be valuable, like people doing addition on Google. But there are probably things outside of that it's much harder to monetize. Big companies can monetize a lot. Well, particularly Google, actually, because they are so closely associated with all manner of seeking information and researching.
So it brings up this natural question, which is like, okay, if people are marketing these ideas which are really useful, how do you separate out their marketing interests from their real intentions? Like, if you come across an idea, how can you tell that it's not just trying to sell you something versus this person is genuinely trying to improve the information landscape?
That's a very interesting question. And I have found, I wish I had a great answer, but I have found that my sense of questioning has needed to be, sharpened quite a bit, especially during the time of the pandemic, when there's literally people in the medical community that seem to be motivated politically because they're saying different things, and they're, it could be two Ivy educated doctors that deeply disagree about things that seem like there should be a scientific, clarity about. So I think skepticism and individual thinking are skills that should be taught. That's my big picture answer is, I'm certainly going to make sure that my son knows that. That's one of the most important things I'll pass on to him. Many important things, including just being there, loving him, all that stuff. But also allowing him to think for himself, because I don't know of a way that you can really know if someone's trying to sell you something. There's some really tricky stuff out there where people make you feel certain ways, and then there's a pitch somewhere in there or somewhere later down the road. And there are many people that don't do that too. And so you just kind of have to have your eyes open, and you're going to be naive and make mistakes in life, and then eventually get to a place where you feel you can read that without having lost too much trust. But as you can see, we get into a deeper human and philosophical type of problem there. with how you should be oriented towards information. And you can't help that to a large degree too. It has to do with like early childhood events to some degree and what you've learned throughout your life as well. I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think about that? Because it's a very deep question.
I was
Well-
going to actually ask before we go into the specifics, do you have any stories of when, hold on.
Excuse me.
Do you have any stories of when you were really taken by something and then you found that there was a pitch somewhere in there?
I do. I'm just trying to think about what I can share
Sure.
publicly. I definitely have a lot of them. Well, I think it can be. Maybe I'll try to answer this way. It could be confusing when you're part of, let's say, a religious organization that both gives you community, gives you feelings, connects you with feelings of spirituality, gives you messaging that is valuable to you and helps you feel closer to higher entities, and yet you have to give money to be a part of it, and they may ask you for money a lot. And that's a confusing situation, depending on how concerned you are about being taken advantage of or how traumatized you are in that area. Some people don't mind at all and say that's how this religious organization, can stay afloat and grow and all the stuff that we want, and that's perfectly reasonable. Other people would distrust it. But I actually think about this sometimes in the context of therapy, where you have just about the most personal relationship you could ever have, where you are talking about things that like you might not tell, your family, like your partner. It's like your deepest stuff you're sharing. And yet it's a paid relationship. And perhaps you might say there's an incentive for it to be a long paid relationship so that the person can live, and there's nothing wrong with that, so they can make money. So money ends up in very personal areas of our lives and becomes a tricky subject quite a bit. And for some people, it's more bothersome than others. But I think you kind of have to accept that value, even if it's not in the form of money, becomes a part of the majority of human relationships, and especially if they're not family relationships. There seems to be, hopefully, an exception in most cases with family.
Well, that's really interesting because it makes you wonder if, in addition to good parenting, if some of these practices could be capitalized on by private educators. So if institutions, even primary educators, start to offer information analysis from a very early age, they might gain a market advantage. And perhaps you would see some of that trickle down to the public education. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about public education on Earth, or in your country.
And this is related to...
Well, is there a role for humans learning how to assess this information and learning how to think clearly and recognize marketing incentives hidden as information?
To like see the pitch, basically, more clearly.
Yeah, I also find that interesting. And I think it would be so valuable to teach this. This is that comment that most people have had someone say to them in conversation at some point in their lives, like, I wish school taught me things like how to read a map or how to manage money or invest or something like that. I think teaching things like meditation and how to question and think independently, I think that's a goal of certain schools, probably, unfortunately, more private schools than public schools.
Right.
And I have heard of some private schools where they really are trying to make you question everything you hear. I think that's a very powerful, positive thing to encourage in people.
Do you think that you undermine your authority as a parent if you teach your kid to question everything, though?
Yes, and I think that that's good. I don't think as long as you continue to represent that you hold space in a safe way, that, daddy, and I'm in the world of dada and mama and daddy and stuff like that with my 2-year-old right now, that, daddy always does a certain thing at a certain time or tends to when we go out to dinner. These are the ways that he acts or something like that. And that becomes a safe space, kind of space to be held in for a child. And I think, I'm going to be very proud of my son the first time I tell him something I believe, and then he questions it, even though it will probably bother me because I'll be like, I'm wise. I've spent years thinking about this. He will, I'll be proud of him, whether I think he's right or not, because I don't know, that would almost be a sign of exactly the type of parenting that I hope to participate in and to give him. So, no, I don't think I'd feel undermined. And I do think you can create a lot of safety and security while still teaching questioning.
I wonder if that can be taken too far. I agree that there's a great deal of necessity for questioning, especially because, even Alphaflosians, humans, we all live in a world where you can't take things at face value, right? Everybody has hidden motivations, whether there's a pitch for money somewhere in there, or it's a pitch for control, or it's a pitch for something that they want from you, right? And it's really important to be able to go through the world and to identify charlatans. This is not a new problem. There's an ancient word for this. A charlatan did not just show up with the advent of SEO and people gaming the front page of Google with whatever it is that they're trying to sell you. This is an old problem that people are kind of coming awake to for the first time now that it's such a central problem. Because there's these things that they trusted in, and now they're awakening to the fact that, well, wait a second, I thought that this was trustworthy, and now I have to spend all my time questioning it, and it's very, very, very difficult.
I don't know if this is the direction you're going, but it's making me think of the fact that there's a much deeper psychological question here of like, when is it, like, you should be okay. You should learn when you're being sold to, but sometimes you want to be sold to. And sometimes you don't know when you're being sold to because your entire disposition is you feel like close to people that want to talk to you or something. I feel like I've known people like that in my life that just they buy into sales because even sales of things they don't need because they feel some community in it. There's a moment of connection with a salesperson. There may be an ongoing relationship. Maybe you get to complain to that person later, and that's important, or you have control over the salesperson. There's a lot of psychology that can go into this ultimately, into sales. And it can even be okay if you are aware of that so that you're not going to be taken in a direction you don't understand and get filled with confusion. I think that's most of the problem. But there we go into a deeper thing of thinking clearly again and understanding what your psyche, your unconscious is inclined towards, and learning to check yourself. And even if you indulge what your psyche wants to do, at least being aware of it so that you're not confused. I always feel like confusion is one of the biggest enemies. It tends to not be good at all.
I think that's right. And it takes us back to the fundamental human attribute of trying to wall off confusion, wall off the chaos. It's really interesting that a lot of this organization that's occurring is based on trying to wall that off, but also maintaining trust that it somehow be remaining objective.
Somebody pointed out the other day of just how much content there is that's on YouTube or the internet. I mean, YouTube is an easy thing to point to, and you've kind of mentioned, Evan, that the YouTube algorithm leaves something to be desired. But there's something like 300 hours of content uploaded every minute to YouTube.
That's a lot of chaos to try to order.
Yeah, the challenge of ordering that to prevent it from just being garbage is enormous. And so the way that you prevent confusion from happening is you give people what they can handle.
So I feel like we've taken a lot of your time, and I wanted to...
Oh, did you have any closing thoughts on that? Evan, you seemed like you were kind of... You had somewhere to go from there.
Well, it sounded like you were returning and almost saying it's not so bad to the concept of showing people a lot of the things that they're already interested in, so they're not confused with too many choices or something like that. I suppose the only thing I would say is that we can all become overwhelmed and confused quickly, and always have some confusion that we're hopefully trying to work out or hopefully are conscious of. But it's nice to have the opportunity to explore new things. We always needed a balance between order and safety and adventure and chaos. So I think that the idea of balance plays in here. There is a use for addictive loops of TikTok silliness, and there is use for diving deep into intellectual topics and getting recommended things that you hadn't heard of that teach you something new and stretch your boundaries a little bit. We just need more of the latter.
Agreed.
So I wanted to ask you one last question.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your human opinion, what's the biggest threat to your species over the next century or so?
I would say it's unrecognized trauma.
Well,
The reason I say that is because when I think of, some people, some individual people have a lot of power and do bad things. Okay, lots of people come to mind when we say that. Different people come to mind depending on who you are and what you believe. Almost always, when someone does something that is, harmful on a large scale, if it can be helped, if it's not one thing where there's bad choices in both directions, it's because they don't recognize that they have really strong needs that originate, early on. And if you at least recognize it and, something bad happened to you and you can just be really pissed about it for a while, years maybe, then you tend to get over it, and then you can have normal highs and lows.
hmm.
And that's human. It's like being happy is not the goal. The goal is to process all your emotions and have those emotions, and then kind of be at whatever frequency you naturally are emotionally. But I think so many people don't even recognize really that there is a psyche. Like, this is almost like some silly Freudian thing that psychologists talk about, rather than potentially more motivating than anything you're consciously aware of in your life. Like, your psyche probably is the thing that directs your actions more than anything you're aware of actually directs your actions. I think the more people that are aware of that, the better. And there are tons of people that would never even listen to me complete that sentence because it would threaten them so much. And are often, people that make bad decisions and hurt others. So when I hear the word threat, I often think of that, because you can usually find that inside a bad actor or someone that's acting in a way that harms others, which I generally call bad when you're harming, directly harming at least others, or knowingly harming someone. So that's my answer.
That's really interesting. It really reminds me of this topic we come across when we speak with earth scientists a lot, which is the idea that biology contains a fair dose of physical material actions like synapses and molecules, but there's this whole other motivational, I hate to use the word spiritual, but these sort of behaviors that possess people, and they're very common.
Desires,
these various natures. And science has a really hard time integrating that side of biology that's not purely material.
They do.
So it's interesting to hear you say that these subconscious spirits that possess people without their knowing are capable of threatening your species even.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest threat. Absolutely. And, I think it, like, in enough time, you'll be able to see the biological grounding for all of it. I wouldn't use the word spiritual, but I like how you used it, because it sometimes can just mean the unexplained when people say spiritual. These are all things that many of them are like scientifically proven and that sort of thing. But also, like, what does that even mean when I say that? Some scientists agree on it. I think we've learned to question that a lot. But I think, I definitely feel these are, provably physical phenomena where, the existence of a psyche and, cycles you stay in if you don't complete them in a healthy way when you're younger and a baby and a toddler and all that stuff. So yeah, that's just something that I've seen to be true. I've seen and known to be true throughout my life, more than most other concepts.
Maybe we could start a species-wide therapy project when we get there. You know what I mean?
Oh boy, I'm in for that.
Excellent.
Well, those effects certainly have physical consequences, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks a lot for talking to us, Evan.
It was wonderful. Thank you. Do you have anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, where can people find you?
Yeah. Well, you can always search my name on Google, Evan Bailyn, Bailyn. And yeah, my SEO company is First Page Sage. And I have a podcast that I do that has nothing to do with SEO called Thoughts and Feelings that you can find on YouTube or thoughtsfeelings.com, where we just talk about interesting sociocultural topics. And that's kind of more my passion. So there's some options.
Cool. We'll put it in the description.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.